everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. This is a really solemn time. It's a very difficult time, not just because of the coronavirus, it's also Yom HaShoah V'Hagvura in Israel. And we thought that we would try talking about a topic that is admittedly also solemn, but in a debate form, maybe a little bit of counter-programming for a time where we're all, thinking a lot about our loved ones. I hope everybody who's joining us is safe and healthy or recovering. I wanted to thank Lisa Lepson, our Vice President of Development at The Forward, and Dina Cooperman, Director of Marketing, for setting this up. We're so grateful to be able to address you this way. We at The Forward, we've been thinking a lot about you, our readers, our community. We've been thinking about ways that we can engage you at this difficult time. The captain of our ship, Jody Rudoran, has been doing these amazing Zoom webinars. She has a few more coming up, one about Jewish journalism, one about the Netflix show Unorthodox. Please tune in. Also, I put our contact information in the chat box below. Please reach out to us. Please let us know how you're doing. We're truly every day thinking about ways that we can service you, our readers, our community. You're super important to us, and this is such a difficult time, and we really are in this together. So all of our coronavirus content at The Forward is free, and also The Forward is offering 1 month free to everybody who showed up today. So keep an eye out for an email with that offer in it. All right, so welcome again if you're just joining us. This is the Forward Zoom debate about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The question that we are going to be talking about debating is anti-Zionism anti-Semitic? I am Batya Ungar-Sargon. I am the opinion editor of The Forward. And with me here is two of our contributing columnists at The Forward, Joel Swanson. Joel is a PhD student at the University of Chicago. He's studying modern Jewish history and philosophy. And also with us is Ari Hoffman. Guys, can you please wave so they know which of you is which? Okay, that's Joel waving right now. And now Ari wave. This is Ari Hoffman. He's a contributing columnist at The Forward. His writing has also appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Tablet Magazine, and the New York Observer. He holds a PhD in English literature from Harvard and a law degree from Stanford. You guys are incredibly educated, and I'm super excited to proceed. I also want to say, so Joel and Ari have done 2 debates for us at The Forward. One was about whether Bernie Sanders is good for the Jews, go read it. And the other one about whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, go read it. They are such wonderful partners. In fact, they remind me of the Talmudic tale of Choni the circle maker, Choni HaMa'agel, who said, give me a chavrusa or give me death, right? We need a partner to debate, to talk about with, and you guys bring so much civility and respect and passion and intellect to these conversations. I'm so grateful to you, and I'm so grateful both for myself and for our readers. And like I said, our contact information is in the chat box below. You'll have Joel, Ari, and my email addresses and our Twitter handles. Reach out to us, talk to us. We want to hear what you're thinking about. We at The Forward are really committed to community at this moment, and we're thinking all day about how to serve you at this difficult time. Please be in touch. And I just want to mention again that The Forward, all of our coronavirus content is free, and there is going to be an offer 1 month free of Forward content for everybody who showed up today, or I think even just registered. So take advantage of that and keep your eyes open for an email about that offer. Okay, so I want to introduce the topic. We're here to debate the question of whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. This is such an important question, I think, because, at a time when anti-Semitism is on the rise, what constitutes anti-Semitism is a really important question. But we Jews don't all agree about what the answer is. And I hear a lot from non-Jewish friends, from Palestinian friends, the stakes are so high. but you don't even agree about what constitutes anti-Semitism. Where does that leave us? So we have, we decided to do this debate at the forward. So Ari and Joel debated it. Ari argued that anti-Zionism, Ari, raise your hand again so that they know who Ari is. The last time I'm gonna make you do this. Ari argued that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, and Joel argued that it is not anti-Semitic. So we decided to do a live version of this, both because it's an important topic, but also because this way we could have draw you in. Coronavirus, we're all stuck at home, we're all isolated, and we were thinking, like, is there a way to make what would be like a panel discussion like more intimate and more interactive, even though we're all at home? And so that was kind of the challenge we set ourselves. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to poll you, actually. We're going to ask you to answer a few questions, 2 questions. We're going to ask you to answer those questions before the debate, and then we're going to ask you to answer the same questions after the debate, and we'll see if anyone has changed their minds. I'm very excited. My hopes are very high because these guys are great. We also are going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A box down below. So please put your questions in there. We want to talk to you, we want to hear from you, and also let us know if we should use your name. I would love to give you some kind of recognition. We already got some emailed questions and I'm going to be reading those out. So let us know both what your question is and if we can read out your name, because we really want to recognize that you're here, that you took time out of your day to be with us. It means so much to us, and we see you. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the poll now. I promise I'm almost done with this lengthy introduction. We're going to do the poll. I'm going to read the 2 questions, and then the poll box is going to show up, and you're going to be able to vote on these questions. It's 2 questions. So let me let you know what the questions are first, and then the poll will show up. Okay, so I want to know, first of all, just the basic question that we are debating here. Do you think anti-Zionism, the belief that there should not be or does not need to be a Jewish state, is that an anti-Semitic point of view? Yes or no? And the second question I'm going to ask you to answer, and these will pop up soon in a little box on your screen, and you'll be able to vote. The second question I want to know is, do you think that the opposite view than the one you hold is a legitimate point of view? Meaning, could you respect someone who disagrees with you about this topic? So meaning, if you think anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, could you respect somebody who thinks it is not? And if you think that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitic, could you respect somebody who thinks it is? In other words, is that, in your view, a legitimate point of view, a legitimate opinion to be had? And that's really where I want to see if we can make a little shift, by the end of this hour. We can't always convince somebody. We can't always convince people that we're right if they don't agree with us. But I think that the real point of a debate is to convince people who disagree with us that our position is a legitimate one, to give them a sense of where we're coming from. So those are the 2 questions. I'm going to read them to you again, and then soon you'll have this little box pop up and you'll be able to vote. Question number 1, do you think anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic? And question number 2 is, do you think that people who hold the opposite view, could you respect them? Is the opposite view a legitimate one? So you should see the box now, and we're going to ask you these same questions at the end of the debate. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys vote. And let us know if you can't see the poll, if you're not getting the... Can everybody see the poll? Okay, great. Is everybody voting? I hope everybody's voting. And I know that the answer is often, it depends. In fact, you'll be surprised to learn that even for Ari and Joel, the answer to, do you think anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, even though they both fell on opposite sides of that, the answer really was, it depends, right, guys? I mean, it really was a qualified answer. So just try to, you know, where do you see yourself going sort of most? Okay, so as you guys vote, and we're going to share, so we're not going to share the results of the poll now. We're going to share the results at the end after you vote for a second time, and then we're going to let you know if there was any difference, and we'll show you the votes before and the votes after. Okay, so we're gonna hold on to these results right now, and we're gonna share them with you at the end when you vote for the second time. Okay, let's get into it. So Ari and Joel, thank you again so much for coming. So Ari, you argue that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, and Joel, you argue that it isn't. I wonder if we could start not with what you disagree with about, but what do you agree about? I mean, there are areas, there is some overlap in your position. You don't completely disagree. Let's start with you, Joel. What are some areas where you agree with Ari?
Sure, great. First of all, thank you so much to Batya, Jody, and the whole team at the Forward for organizing this fantastic event. Thank you to Ari for being part of it and being a fantastic sparring partner in the Forward. And thank you all so much for joining us today. What I take to be a point of agreement between us is that I take Ari to concede that it's at least possible to conceive of a motivation for opposing the existence of a Jewish state that isn't rooted in bigotry and opposition to Jewish people as a whole. And I think the obvious example of that position would be the Satmar Hasidim, which is a particular religious community that opposes Zionism and the state of Israel for religious and messianic reasons, that is obviously not rooted in opposition to Jews as a people, as peoplehood, regardless of whether you agree with their position or not. And likewise, I'm happy to concede that while I don't take the anti-Zionist position to be axiomatically anti-Semitic, that there are a lot of examples of anti-Zionist campaigns that are motivated by anti-Semitism. And what I would use as the classic example of that is in the Eastern Bloc, in the former Soviet Union, the former communist countries. There were a lot of campaigns, for instance, in communist Poland, that were pitched as anti-Zionist campaigns that in practice just meant hounding Jewish people out of public life. That's clearly not principled opposition to Zionism as an ideology. It's just anti-Semitism branded as anti-Zionism. So
you had this amazing line in the debate where you said that anti-Zionism is not a get out of anti-Semitism free card. I thought that was just so well put.
Yeah, thank you. So I obviously, given the strong and a close association between the state of Israel and the Jewish people today, I think it's incumbent on people expressing an anti-Zionist position to be especially careful that they're not engaging with anti-Semitic groups such as blood libels or things of that nature. So, and I don't think that anti-Zionism as a whole is always guilty of that, but I do think that it's incumbent on people expressing that position to make absolutely sure that they're not engaging in anti-Semitic rhetoric. And certainly you can find examples of anti-Zionists who are not as careful about drawing that distinction as they should be.
Mm-hmm. And Ari, what are some areas where you feel that you agree with Joel?
Yeah, well, hello, everybody. I just want to reiterate what Joel mentioned is another phrase from the Talmud called the Chvod Achsania, with the permission of the host. And I want to thank not only the hosts, Batya and Jody, but really the whole Forward community of readers in the Forward world for really being such wonderful readers of me and of other people, and really partners in thinking through these months of the presidential primary, of stretching back to the sort of anti-Semitism, and now, of course, this sort of surreal and difficult moment we're in now. I couldn't have gotten it through it sort of intellectually without all of you, so thank you. I think Joel's largely right. I mean, I think we both would agree that in this sort of vast stream of Jewish history and Jewish thought, there have been many currents that didn't necessarily end up, or don't necessarily end up, in the conviction that a modern nation state is the sort of vehicle for Jewish national existence in some way. And that's present in sort of strands of religious Hasidic thought, as Joel mentioned. There's no doubt that if we were all sitting around a cafe in Warsaw in 1925, some of us would be Zionists and some of us would be Bundists, and some of us would be Polish nationalists in some sense, and none of us would be anti-Semites, right? So I think acknowledging the richness of that tapestry is something we both sort of readily acknowledge. Where we might start to diverge is what that means now and today and in this moment. One other caveat is, of course, in asserting that in its broad and sort of mainstream articulation that anti-Zionism is adjacent to anti-Semitism, I don't mean to, and this might be a difficult distinction to make, I don't mean to impugn individual people of thoughtful goodwill who in their own sort of ideological formations come to a certain point or not. So needless to say, I'm not impugning, God forbid, that Joel is an anti-Semite. I would never do that. And I think we're speaking in terms of ideas, and we're speaking in terms of movements, and sort of trying to trace ideas and where they lead, where they start, where they begin, how they express themselves, and where they end.
It's so funny because now that we've set up all of the agreement, it's like, okay, let's go home. But no, there are a lot of areas of disagreement. So I want to move into that next. I thought what could be fun is if instead of asking you each to summarize your opinion, we could sort of do an exercise in compassion and have Ari, I would like to hear if you could summarize Joel's position, and then hear Joel summarize your position and see how accurate that is. So Ari, why don't you start?
That's great. That's great. It's sort of like in the classical world, whether you'd have to argue in
right.
the law school. Whatever. Okay.
And by the way, if anyone's joining us right now, just so you don't get the wrong impression, so Ari argued in the foreword that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, by and large. And Joel argued that by and large, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitic. But now what I'm asking them to do is to summarize each other's arguments. So I'm asking Ari to summarize Joel's argument that he disagrees with, and then I'll ask Joel to summarize Ari's argument that he disagrees with. All right, go ahead, Ari.
Great. Well, I think what I take as one of Joel's central points is that the translation from a nation state with a particular ethnic, religious, or cultural commitment, let's say the state of Israel, moving towards what he calls a state based on civic equality, is not something to fear. But fundamentally, that's something that happens in the life cycles of states, and that being supporting that transition is just the business of working for a more just world and a more just society. That the movement away from an avowedly Jewish state, if we take that as shorthand for the Zionist project, is a way towards guaranteeing legal rights for everyone, and that in contradistinction to that being prejudiced or racist, that's actually the opposite, right? That's fighting for what we would call a sort of democratic idea. He, I think, very incisively notes that the right to exist as it's framed is actually the right to exist in its present form, and that existence is somehow doesn't mean that a state can't change. And I think in Joel's idea, a shift towards something more like a binational kind of state of all its citizens. I think another sort of strategic point Joel makes is that it's to argue for the separation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is that he points to the world and he says, look, there are leaders who exemplify this bifurcation, right? Leaders like Orban in Hungary, who is engaged in anti-Semitic propaganda against George Soros and Jews generally. Even people like Bolsonaro in Brazil, who's sort of played to racist or populist notions, and are both sort of allies of some sort of Benjamin Netanyahu or of Israel more generally. So he says, look, it's not an abstraction. It's a real thing that we see in the world. I think finally, I think Joel and others would look at this sort of situation on the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, as kind of calling the bluff, right? Of saying that somehow this is where the rubber meets the road, that the occupation is a kind of fulcrum for the sort of impossibility of having it all, right? Of saying that, you know, if you're not a Zionist, you're an anti-Semite. Well, we'll look at what's happened, you know, east of Jerusalem in the last 50 years. And that's a sort of not only unsustainable, but also proves a sort of ideological point as well. That's my best shot, Joel.
Okay, Joel, I want you to summarize Ari now, and then afterwards I want you each to talk about how accurate the summary was, and then also, you know, respond to it, and you can talk about what you actually think.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you, Ari, for that charitable and helpful reading of what I was trying to argue. What I take to be Ari's point is that while if we could somehow time warp back to Warsaw in 1920, there would be a whole ideological constellation of positions around Jewishness and statehood and identity, which would take a whole range of positions on Zionism and statehood. That might be an interesting historical and intellectual hypothetical process of hypothesizing, but the fact is that at this point it's all hypothetical. That the fact is that since 1948, we're living in a world where the project of Jewish liberation and of Jewish self-determination after the Shoah, obviously I want to acknowledge that today is Yom HaShoah, and we should all keep that in mind, that after this catastrophic event that devastated the world's Jewish community, that the project of rebuilding Jewish culture has in practice taken the form of a national project of state building, and that it is now the case that roughly half of the world's Jews live in Israel. They have an Israeli culture, they have Israeli national institutions, and there's no way to disestablish that state that has been formed under those auspices without basically leading to millions of Jews becoming stateless, being put in a tenuous position, and not having anywhere safe to go. And the fact is that while it might be possible in sort of the vast intellectual stream of history to imagine other ways for Jews to exist in the Middle East or in the land of Israel that don't take the form of a Jewish nation state, the fact is that on the ground, all of those other forms failed. Binationalism, as was imagined by certain Jewish intellectuals in the 1920s, failed. Attempts to partition the state in the 1940s failed. The fact is that what has succeeded at securing a future for Jewish people in the land is the Zionist project of national liberation around a Jewish nation state, and that the project of Israel is bound up in Jewish history, and to wish it to disappear, to wish it to transform to the point that it isn't recognizable as a Jewish state, would in practice result in statelessness and disenfranchisement for millions of Jewish people surrounded by a largely hostile Muslim world. I also take Ari to be saying that the project of Palestinian national liberation is in many ways not a project of civic equality within one state, but a project of imagining their own form of nation statehood, which actually takes Zionism as, in many ways, its successful model, as one of the most successful post-World War II national ethnic liberation movements that has succeeded in achieving statehood and achieving a form of statehood that has secured the future for millions of people in the land, that actually, far from defining Palestinian national liberation in opposition to Zionism, that Zionism can serve as the model for a form of national liberation that would enable Palestinians to imagine a better future for themselves. So we might disagree on how to imagine Palestinian liberation and Zionism as relating to one another. I think Ari is taking the point that as one of the world's most successful liberation movements built around nationalism, Zionism should really serve as a model for other oppressed peoples and other people striving for their own autonomy and statehood to look towards as an exemplar.
So you guys, it's amazing because you're so generous with each other. To me, those sound like very accurate summaries of your arguments, and I'm very excited to hear if you find them to be accurate and also to hear you respond to them. I do want to respond to one of the questions in the Q&A from Michael Chaikov, who said I can share his name. Thank you, Michael, for reaching out. He wrote, what was your intention in scheduling this debate on Yom HaShoah? And I just want to respond to that. It wasn't intentional. It was largely about figuring out when with the schedule in terms of Passover, when we were off observing the holiday, and also coronavirus, and figuring out a time when we felt that it would be appropriate to start thinking about other things. But I do think it's very appropriate to discuss this question on Yom HaShoah, because Yom HaShoah, as you'll hear, is the Holocaust is so much a part of this question. I think, on both ends, it's just something that really informs how all of us think about Zionism. Whether you think it's anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic or not, like the Holocaust is something we are all constantly thinking about in this context. So it wasn't intentional, but I don't think it's inappropriate for this conversation to be happening on Yom HaShoah.
I would say it. I would agree with that, Batya. I'd say that every single Jewish conversation, no matter what day of the year it happens in the shadow of the Holocaust. Right? It doesn't cash out into a specific ideological position, but it means it's a kind of seriousness, and a kind of sense of stakes. I think that Joel and I, and so many of you listening, both. I mean, this is why, to some extent, this is what underwrites our care and concern for these, enormous questions.
Yeah, and also for how we think about our community and how to incorporate within our community people we disagree with. It's, you know what I mean? Like, what could be more important? Okay, so let's get back to the topic. So Ari, why don't you, first of all, I would love to hear how you feel about Joel's summary of your argument, and then a few of your responses.
Yeah, it was better than I could do. But I would just add one thing to it. So I think a central part of my thinking is, yes, that we live in history, right? And we live at a moment in history, and we live at a moment when, close to 7 million Jews are living and dying and falling in love and fighting and building and a part of a country, right? And to wish that country away, to me, is just on one level just doesn't make sense. I think that's right. That's absolutely right. And that if we were in, 1820 or 1720 or 1920, our vistas would be different and our horizons would be different. But I think I want to make an even stronger argument. And that's not just that we live in a world where, we have to deal with what we have, but that actually the idea of a particular state expressing a people's culture, imbued with its values, also committed to democratic principles, is in fact like an a priori good. That it's in fact independent from history is something that's admirable, and that should be fought for as itself a value. And that once we establish that overarching point, but then the specific case, I would say, is that no people has as much a connection to a particular part of the world as the Jewish people have to the land of Israel. And no national liberation movement is as connected to a specific territory over an extended period of time in a variety of cultural ways as the Jewish story is connected to the land of Israel. And that project is something that is itself a good. Even if you think that goes too far, certainly the fact is sort of anti-Zionism, right, that wants to sort of undo that, certainly the Jewish state shouldn't be where we begin. And I sort of want to think, sort of as we get into it, this sort of idea that, can we think of another phrase that goes with anti-Zionism that would in fact express the same thing about another country? Is there a word that would express not just opposition to American policies, but that America itself should not exist on its founding principles, or that France should not exist on its founding principles? I think that silence screams volumes, that there's one national project that somehow still seems uprootable. And I'll leave it there, but.
Joel, a lot to respond to. You could respond to Ari's argument. You can respond to his summary of yours, or you could tell us, you know, in your own words, your argument.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Ari, for doing a very eloquent job of summarizing my argument in the forward. I'll just respond briefly to a few of Ari's points. Ari, you made the point that sort of anti-Zionism as an expression of opposition to certain policies of the Jewish state goes beyond sort of just opposition to the Netanyahu government or to certain decisions that the current Israeli leadership may be making, and seems to go much further in calling for the abolition of the Jewish state as a whole. And you can't find analogs in opposition to France or the United States or Venezuela or a whole range of other states where one might disagree with individual policies that their governments are implementing, but one rarely calls for the abolition of the state as a whole. I want to push back a little bit on that point, because I do think that we see a whole range of positions in the United States that call for radically rethinking the foundations upon which the United States was founded, to say that sort of redressing certain inequalities upon which the United States was founded, centered around slavery, around oppression of Native peoples, actually requires radically rethinking the organization of our society today. And I think that that's an analog to what a lot of people advancing what is considered an anti-Zionist position in the state of Israel today are arguing for. They're not necessarily arguing for the fact that all Jews need to leave the land, for the argument that the Jewish people don't have a connection to the land of Israel in history. They're arguing for the fact that that a future that ensures civic equality and a sustainable, livable future for everyone living between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River requires radically rethinking the structures of statehood upon which the current Jewish state of Israel was founded. And here, this gets to another point that I think I want to make here, which is that oftentimes when we debate Zionism and anti-Zionism, we're talking past one another because we don't necessarily agree with what Zionism even means. Today, Zionism is taken, broadly speaking, as a position which requires that Jews make up a voting majority of the population in the state, which requires that you can't enfranchise all the Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank as part of the same state, because then Jews would not make up a voting majority anymore. But a lot of Zionists throughout history, a lot of very esteemed Zionist intellectuals would not have agreed with that position. They argued for a form of binationalism that allowed everyone living within the land. And they didn't see that as anti-Zionist because they thought that that was an expression of a future where the land could have a connection with Jewish culture. Jews could have institutions within the land, and that would be governed by a country that would ensure civic equality and voting rights for all. Advocates of that position included such august early Zionist activists as Henrietta Zold, the founder of Hadassah, the women's Zionist organization, and Martin Buber, the editor of Theodor Herzl's Die Welt Zionist journal in Europe before he made Aliyah. So I don't take the position that anti-Zionism is calling for a unique abolition of the state of Israel in a way that anti-Americanism might not be calling for the abolition of the United States. I think advocating for a position of civic equality where Jews and Palestinians have a future within the land that doesn't deny either of them having a historical lineage, having a cultural connection to the land, having a deep place of reverence for the land in their culture, but ensures that the institutions of statehood represent both of them and both of their national interests. I don't take that to be an anti-Semitic position. And I'll close briefly just by quoting from a former Israeli Arab member of the Knesset, Jamal Zahalka, who represented the Arab Joint List. He introduced a Knesset bill which would turn the land of Israel into a state where Jews and Arabs and Palestinians and Jews would both have a connection to the land, but would both be able to vote for that everyone in the West Bank and Gaza and Israel within the Green Line would be able to vote equally. He said about his bill, and I quote, we do not deny Israel or its right to exist as a home for Jews. We don't say that the state is not for Jews. We say it is for Jews and Arabs. So today that's a position taken as anti-Zionist because it denies Jews the ability to have a state where they comprise a voting majority. But I don't see that as necessarily calling for the abolition of all Jewish claims to the land, but it's a call for a reconfiguring of what we mean when we talk about the land of Israel and the institutions that govern it, and a rethinking that is consonant with many early Jewish activists who very much considered themselves Zionists.
Thanks for that. I mean, one point on the question on the word Zionism. I mean, partially why I'm on the side I'm on in this argument is because I do want an expansive definition of Zionism. I want a definition as large as it can hold and not fall apart. I worry about the way in which Zionism in some precincts on the left, and I know many of you watching are interested in sort of the campus dimension of this debate, has become the ugliest slur. The worst insult you can call someone is a Zionist. And I worry that sort of legitimizing a thoroughgoing anti-Zionist position and removing this stigma attached to it is sort of giving up on all of those possibilities, actually. I think that actually it's sort of to keep that expansiveness, we need to keep the fight we need to fight for the word. And we need to fight for that spectrum that's sort of contained in the word. As to your point about sort of
Sorry, could you just define, so what does Zionism mean to you and what does anti-Zionism mean to you? And maybe, so Josh Abelman wants us to also define anti-Semitism, which I think is such an obvious thing. Thanks, Josh. So let's, both of you, just define those three terms, right? What is Zionism? What is anti-Zionism? What is anti-Semitism? Ari, why don't you start?
Sure. I mean, I take Zionism, at its most basic point as just sort of the movement for self-determination for the Jewish people. The idea that that the Jewish people, as an ancient people, as a kind of archetype of what a people or nation is, has a right to or case for a state that reflects that richness, that tradition, and that history. Just like there are uncountable numbers of states that reflect the history and traditions of Islam, that there are states throughout Europe that have a cross on their flag, that have their head of state as their head of church, that there is room in this world, in a Middle East of 300 million Arabs, for 6 million Jews to pursue their national story on a stage that's a nation state.
So Joel, do you accept that definition of Zionism?
Well, I think that the very expansive definition of Zionism that you are promoting as Zionism as sort of the national liberation, the movement of autonomy, and sort of the movement of national self-determination for the Jewish people is a very expansive definition of Zionism, which I think throughout history it has often been taken to mean. And part of, I guess, what I want to push back on is, if you define Zionism such that Zionism encompasses Jewish self-determination in all its forms, then it's easy to get from there to thinking that opposition to that is anti-Semitic. Because if you oppose the ability for the Jews to have a future of self-determination, of autonomy, then obviously that you're opposed to Jewish thriving, to Jewish peoplehood. But what I want to push back on is how that term has come to be used today. I think in practice, most political debates take Zionism as requiring a state where Jews make up a majority of the voting population, so that if you enfranchise all the Palestinian Arabs living in Gaza and the West Bank to vote for the government that is currently administering their freedom of movement in the state of Israel, that would be an anti-Zionist position. And that, I think, is part of the problem here. At a most expansive level, Zionism as Jewish self-determination and Jewish national autonomy, Jewish liberation, I don't think anyone who has lived as a Jew in this world would be opposed to that. And I think certainly opposition to that those kind of future possibilities for the Jewish people isn't at a broad level anti-Semitic, but I don't want to concede that on the grounds that necessarily requires us to take the form of institutions of statehood that require Jews to have a voting majority. And so I think—
Ari, what do you say specifically to that? Sorry, Joel, I want Ari to respond specifically to that point. Like, is your definition of anti-Zionism, which you view as anti-Semitic, requiring the disenfranchisement of Israel's minorities to a certain degree?
Well, I think two things. One is, as we know, and as so many of our listeners know, nearly 20% of Israel, if not a little bit more, are Israeli Arabs, who live as a minority that is empowered to some degree. That obviously there's work to do, but fundamentally see themselves as a citizen of a state whose flag does not represent their deepest aspirations. Jews know this story well. We've done it for 2 millennia. What it means to live in a state and not see yourself reflected in its organs of power and in its culture and in its anthem. So my first point is that I don't think that's inherently oppressive, right? Like, to not look in the mirror of the state and see yourself looking back at you.
In fact, the three of us choose to live in America, where we do not see ourselves in that way. America's large.
Or might in different ways, or sort of whatever. Yeah, I think that's right. On the point of the voting, I think two things. One, and I'll be honest here, I have doubts whether it can work. I mean, you talked about Martin Buber, and and I can add to that the great scholar Gershom Scholem, and of course Judah Magnus, who founded Hebrew University. There was this idea of a binational state. It drowned in blood. It drowned in the pogroms in Hebron in 1929. It drowned in a low grade, and sometimes high grade ethnic civil war that preceded the establishment of the state of Israel. So I think and it failed not because it was too good an idea. It failed because it didn't map onto what happened. So, and to update that, I look at the Middle East today and I say, what's the track record of minorities in the Middle East? And I look at the Yazidis, and I look at other groups. I look at our brothers and sisters in the Jewish world who lived in Iraq and Baghdad for thousands of years, and their story ended with hanging from the square, the central square, right? The complete elimination of the world of Arab Jewry, complete. And I'm not willing to do that again. I'm not willing to give anyone a veto, and I'm not willing to have like Ramat Gan become Raqqa in Syria. And so on the level of practicality, I dissent, but also on the level of sort of on the ideal. And I think you articulated better than I could. I sort of see Zionism in some ways in its institution building, in its sort of sense of taking what you've got and building it as a model, a template, not a yoke, but a touchstone for sort of other national determination movements. And I think your average Palestinian would want to live in a state, to ventriloquize, to live in a state that reflects their story and their history and their flag. And I'm committed to that because I'm a Zionist, not despite being a Zionist.
So Joel, I want to go back a little bit to the college question. And because I know that that's something that, for our viewers right now, our readers, is really important. I do actually think that the amount of anti-Zionism on college campuses has been a little bit overblown, and that it is largely an elite phenomenon. But I speak to students a lot who are really devastated and struggling with this. They feel, for example, embarrassed to admit that they're going on birthright, things like that. The idea of Zionist being a slur, feeling the censure of their peers for being Zionists. What do you say to that? Like, how can bring them into this conversation? How do you view that? Is it okay to censure Zionism because it has problems from your point of view? That talk to those students for me. How do you see that?
Sure, thank you. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Chicago. I spend most of my time on a university campus, not unfortunately physically right this minute, again in the future. And in my department, we have a wide range of ideological positions represent. I mean, I have colleagues who are everything from Palestinian nationalists to a colleague who formerly worked for the Netanyahu government and then came to do a doctorate here. So I speak to people from a very broad array of ideological positions. And on the most basic level, I think that certainly Zionism is such a broad and such a historically capacious term that I don't think that just hearing that someone is a Zionist should be enough to attack them as a racist, should be enough to attack them as a bigot, should be enough to assume that they don't care about Palestinian rights. And to the extent that that's happening, I've always pushed back against that and argued that simply knowing that someone is a Zionist doesn't really tell you a lot about their positioning with regard to the policies of the current state, doesn't tell you a lot about what they think about the future for the region, just doesn't tell you a lot about them, where they position themselves ideologically without knowing a lot more about what Zionism means to them. And I've always argued that both sides.
Do you think that knowing that someone is a Palestinian nationalist is the mirror image of that? That knowing that someone supports Palestinian rights, you also adopt a kind of wait and see approach to their broader commitments?
Well, certainly I know and interact with Palestinian nationalists in my department and in my field, and I don't necessarily assume that their Palestinian nationalism requires them to take one particular position on what the future for Jews in the region looks like. I want to ask them more about what that looks like to them, what their future possibilities for the region look like. I don't think that simply knowing that someone is a nationalist of either kind, Zionism, Jewish nationalism, Palestinian nationalism, should be taken as the be all and end all and should necessarily be defined in opposition to the other form of nationalism without pressing them a little bit further on what that means. But to return to the point about Jewish students on university campuses today, I do think that it's important to push back against the sort of sensationalist headlines about Jews and are being, hounded when they go to Hillel for their support for Israel, or Jews who go on birthright are being banned from participating in university activities. To the extent that you can find individual examples of that happening, obviously it's wrong and we should push back on it. But there was a recent Stanford University survey of Jewish students at 5 California universities, which found that the vast majority of respondents felt comfortable as Jews, felt comfortable expressing their Jewishness, felt comfortable talking about Israel when they did or did not want to do so, and didn't feel that their position on university campuses was untenable at all. And similarly, a survey conducted by Brandeis University of Jewish college students nationwide found that 80% of them, fully 4 in 5, did not perceive the majority of the criticism of Israel that they heard as anti-Semitic. They didn't feel that they as Jews were held personally accountable for Israel's actions. And moreover, among those students in this Brandeis study who did report feeling discomfort on campus about issues relating to Israel and Palestine, Zionism and Palestinian nationalism, many of them actually attributed this discomfort as much to sort of a well-funded network of pro-Israel groups on campus as to anti-Zionists on campus. And there were students quoted in this Brandeis survey who felt that, simply going to Hillel was requiring them to take a position on Israel or to take a position in support of certain positions about Zionism that they didn't necessarily want to take. So if we're going to think about how to ensure that Jews on college campuses feel safe, and again, the vast, vast majority of them do feel safe, do feel comfortable, do feel that they can be themselves, we should think about how we as a community are defining expressions of Jewishness and how those are and are not being conflated with certain political positions about Israel.
I agree with everything you just said, but I think there still is that small contingent. They are a small percentage, yet I seem to encounter them a lot because I think
Yeah, but maybe if I can just jump in. Yeah, I was actually reading just a piece actually appeared recently in the forward, and it was about the campus at UC Irvine, and it was the student government had adopted an Israel divestment resolution and recently repealed it. And the question was why, and the answer was this, and I quote, that adopting divestment had precipitated a, quote, sustained campaign of harassment and intimidation against Jewish students. The adoption of the divestment resolution created a noxious campus climate that fostered the aforementioned campaign of harassment. And I just want to speak to that, the idea that, you know, oftentimes a sort of virulent anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism is a fellow traveler of animus to Jews more broadly. And I don't know how to square the circle of sort of surveys that Joel mentioned and sort of anecdotes that so many of us who have written about the campus issue see and hear. And I have Jewish students on campus who reach out to me all the time and indicate that they feel under attack because they're Zionists and ask me to speak to them or look at op-eds that they're writing or somehow advise them. And I think that's real. You know, the idea that on college campuses you have rallies against Zionism, and yet somehow they're dotted with Palestinian flags. Well, wait a second. If we're against a certain kind of nationalism, if we see that the Zionist project is racist, why is there another flag there? You know, if we all believed in some post-historical Pangea with no boundaries, with no borders, okay. But I think how this rubber meets the road oftentimes is it's selective. And that selectivity to me is a little bit of the tell towards anti-Semitism, which is the ultimate ideology of selective attention and selective kind of evidence.
Do you want to respond to that, Joel?
Sure. Certainly, I don't deny that there are examples of anti-Zionist campaigns, divestment campaigns on campus that have disproportionately targeted Jewish students, and to the extent that that is happening, we should absolutely call it out. And your point about Palestinian nationalism and why some nationalisms are more acceptable in certain leftist spaces is a well taken point. And certainly there are groups that are debating, you know, if we're imagining a post-national utopia, should there be a space for Palestinian nationalism? Should there be a space for Jewish nationalism? And what form do those movements take in sort of the future that is being imagined is a widely debated topic and should be debated. And while I think it's important to stress that Brandeis and Stanford have surveyed Jewish students and found that the vast majority of them feel totally comfortable on campus, to the extent you can find examples of Jewish students being made to feel uncomfortable or being made to be associated with the actions of the state of Israel because of their Jewish identities, that's wrong, and absolutely we should call that out. But I want to push back a little bit on a point you seem to be suggesting that today, that even if throughout the vast streams of history we can imagine forms of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that are very distinct, that today a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of opposition to Jewish self-determination and Jewish thriving takes the form of the banner of anti-Zionism. To the extent that that's true, I want to broaden the point here and point out that there are a lot of examples of far-right anti-Semitism today that actually goes hand in hand with pro-Israel, with support of the government of Israel, but opposition to diaspora Jews. I mean, we can point to the government of Viktor Orban in Hungary. We can point to the government of Bolsonaro in Brazil. There are a whole range of Eastern European governments. The government of Poland, the ruling Law and Justice Party is another example that profess pro-Israel foreign policy while also stoking a lot of anti-Semitism against their own small, at this point, Jewish populations. I mean, Viktor Orban, I think, is probably the most paradigmatic example. He uses very anti-Semitic rhetoric about Jews in the diaspora about Hungarian Jews, calling them, rootless cosmopolitans, enemies who speculate with money. And this isn't just rhetoric.
With the imprimatur of Yad Vashem, where he was invited by Benjamin Netanyahu.
So I actually think that this has real, that sort of a too close conflation with anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism has real consequences for the safety of Jews in the diaspora, because in practice it can too easily be extended to the opposite position, to sort of, if you're pro-Israel, your anti-Semitism against the diaspora is okay. But in fact, the Anti-Defamation League, their survey of countries for anti-Semitic attitudes actually found that Hungary is the most anti-Semitic country in Europe. So, I mean, Orban can go to Israel, travel to Israel and appear with Netanyahu, but it doesn't make Jews in his own country feel safe. So to the extent that you're saying that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, insofar as they go together, we need to condemn anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist movements, I absolutely agree. But I want to see the institutional Jewish community and Zionist activists be equally consistent in saying that your Zionism doesn't excuse anti-Semitism against the diaspora. And I don't think we always are so good at adhering to that standard on both sides.
So Ari, quick response, because it's time to do the poll again. I can't believe we're almost done. Quick response from Ari, and we're going to do the poll again.
I would just say that there's always going to be Viktor Orbáns in this world. Jews know that well. And thank God there's a state of Israel he feels he has to kowtow to. Because if there wasn't, the whole world would look like Hungary. And I think that, the rich, deep question of the relationship of the state of Israel to world Jewry is an interest. Maybe we could do another one of these just on that. I think, I would not shake hands with Viktor Orbán, but do I see the way in which the hard bargain I support, the Zionist bet, is that to be an actor in history, you have to assume the responsibilities and sometimes the dirt of power, and that you look that in the face and you sit with it and you live with it and you try to do the best you can with it. And that's the Zionist project, right? Is that you're in it, you're in the arena. And either you want to be in that arena or you don't. And I would want to be that every day of the week.
That's such a great place to transition, because we feel we are very much in it with you. The Forwards readers, we really feel that you are part of this community with us. We're trying very hard to serve you at this really difficult time. Please reach out to us. Please email us. Please let us know what we could be doing better to help you. And here's the poll again. We're going to take the poll. Please vote a second time. Same questions. Do you think anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic? And then do you think you could respect somebody who disagreed with you? Do you think it's a legitimate point of view, the people on the other side of this? Please vote again. And then we're going to have a screen come up to show if there has been any change. Actually, the initial results were very, very interesting to me. So we're going to see those in a second. I think you'll all be very surprised by them, and we'll see if this debate has had any impact on you. Thank you again to Lisa and Dina for setting this up, and I want to remind you all that the forward will be free for 1 month for anybody who was here, and that all of our coronavirus coverage is free for you all. We're in this together. You are our community. And we're so grateful to be here to serve you at this time. So please take the second poll, same poll, second time. And then we're gonna all see the results, and Ari and Joel will discuss them, and then we'll sign out. Let you get back to your lives. Can everybody see has the thing popped up for everybody? I'm also so sorry we didn't get to a lot of the questions. We had some great questions via email, and we just didn't get to them because it's such a rich topic, but maybe we'll schedule a follow-up. You have all of our emails. You have my email, you have Joel's email, you have Ari's email. If you have questions for them, they have really generously put themselves out there for you. So here are the results. Let's take a look. So the before I thought was very interesting. You all were pretty much divided on whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, almost 50-50. And you're perfectly divided afterwards. So there was a little bit of a shift. And now let's see the second part. Could you respect somebody who disagreed with you? We've got, oh, wow. So that's super interesting. Fewer people after the debate think that the other position is legitimate than beforehand. So in a way we succeeded, and in a way we also failed a little bit. What do you guys think?
Well, we didn't vote. So, I mean, the margin was small. We weren't the ones that, pushed it over the edge.
What do you think of these results, guys? What does it tell you about the Forward's readers?
Well, if I just quickly, I mean, one of the reasons why I love writing for the Forward, and I write, I've written for other places as well. It's one of the few places where you really have a diverse readership, not in a deep way, and that's just the best. I mean, who among us gets a 50-50 readership? I mean, that's.
I know. When I got these results in the beginning, I was like, that's really impressive. I mean, that's just great. It also means that the two of you are representing, each of you is representing 50% of our readership. And at the Forward, we're so deeply committed to representing the full breadth of legitimate opinion relevant to our community. And so these debates, I think we're going to have a lot more of them. What do you think, Joel? What do you think looking at this? What are your impressions?
This is super interesting to me. I'm a little bit unsure about why could you respect someone who disagreed with you? Although it's pretty statistically indistinguishable, and that's great. And I think the takeaway here is that the vast majority of people the vast majority of Forward readers are open to disagreeing to respecting positions that they disagree with, are open to considering positions that they might not hold themselves. And that also that's what I love about writing for the Forward and having the opportunity to be a columnist for the Forward. That's what I love about having discussions with Ari, which has been a really fantastic opportunity to have reasoned debate with someone I disagree with, but someone I profoundly respect. And I think that so much of Jewish tradition is about intellectual debate and about disagreement, going back to the Talmud and, Hillel and Shammai, and modeling this tradition of disagreeing while still being part of the same community. And I think the Forward readership, the Forward op-ed page really models that. And so I'm really happy to be part of that.
Thank you both so much for doing this. Thank you for continuing to have these debates. Thank you to everybody who was here. This was just such a delight. I super respect you guys, especially the way you're voting here, like Joel said. Thank you for coming. I just want to tell you all, be safe, be kind to yourselves, and be kind to everybody around you. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
You guys, that was so awesome.